Some wild places hide in plain sight. On the southwest edge of the Twin Cities, tucked between highways and quiet neighborhoods, a string of lakes, marshes, and restored prairie stretches on for miles. Over 2 late summer mornings, we walked into it through 2 different doors. One gateway in Bloomington, one in Eden Prairie, both opening onto the same connected wilderness. This is Hyland-Bush-Anderson Lakes, one of the largest natural refuges hidden in the heart of Minnesota's biggest metro. To understand this place, it helps to start from above. Here, just south of Minneapolis and a little east of the Minnesota River, lies a park reserve of 2,565 acres. It spans the border of 2 suburbs, Bloomington on the east and Eden Prairie on the west. Hyland Lake and Bush Lake sit on the Bloomington side. The Anderson Lakes spill across the line into Eden Prairie. Roads and rooftops press in on every side. And yet inside these boundaries, the land still breathes much the way it did centuries ago. The story of these lakes begins in ice. Around 11,700 years ago, as the last glaciers melted, a colossal meltwater river called Glacial River Warren tore across the region. It drained an inland sea, Glacial Lake Agassiz, and carved a valley up to 5 miles wide and 250 feet deep. That great trench became the Minnesota River Valley. As the ice pulled back, it left buried blocks that slowly melted into hollows, and those hollows filled with water. The quiet lakes we walk beside today are the fingerprints of that vanished ice. Long before any park boundary was drawn, this was and remains Dakota homeland. The people of this region are the Bdewakantunwan, the Bdewakantunwan Dakota, whose name means dwellers by the sacred lake. Their world centered on the Minnesota River Valley and on Bdew, the meeting of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers just downstream from here. These lakes, marshes, and oak groves were places of fishing, gathering, and life. We walk them with respect, on land whose deepest story is not ours to tell, but ours to honor. What surrounds us now is rarer than it looks. This open woodland, scattered oaks standing over waving grass, is oak savanna, once one of the most common landscapes in this part of Minnesota, and today one of the most endangered. Fire kept it open for thousands of years. Widely spaced bur oaks, their bark thick enough to survive the flames, throw pools of shade across sunlit prairie. Fewer than 1 in 100 acres of the original savanna still survives in the state, which makes every grove we pass a small living museum. By the early 20th century, most of the region's forests and prairies had been cleared for farms, and the lakes could easily have vanished under subdivisions too. In 1955, Minnesota's legislature created what was then the Hennepin County Park Reserve District, later renamed 3 Rivers. Within its first decade, the young district bought nearly 21,000 acres of open space. Beginning in 1967, its crews set out to do something unusual for the time, to actively restore wetland, prairie, and woodland back toward the way they looked before settlement. Near the heart of Hyland stands the Richardson Nature Center, a quiet building of glass and wood set where prairie meets pond. It is the kind of place where school groups meet their first snapping turtle and where the trails begin. Paved loops thread out from here through grassland and marsh, connecting walkers to the water. From its windows, you can watch the seasons turn across the whole reserve, and from its doorstep the paths we are following lead gently down toward the lakes. The trail brings us to open water. Bush Lake lies bright and calm, ringed by cattails and the dark green of late summer woods. Sunlight scatters across its surface while dragonflies stitch the air above the reeds. Lakes like this one are shallow and rich, nurseries for fish, frogs, and countless insects that feed the birds overhead. Stand at the shoreline long enough and the suburb behind you seems to disappear. There is only the lake, the wind moving through the grass, and the slow, patient business of a wetland going about its day. This ground has its own strange history, written into winter. Above Bush Lake rises a set of ski jumps, home to the Minneapolis Ski Club, which has been launching jumpers into the Minnesota sky since 1926. As the club likes to point out, they were flying off this hillside before the city of Bloomington was even incorporated. On summer mornings, the towers stand silent over the prairie, but each winter skiers still climb them and soar. A century-old tradition perched on the very edge of a wildlife refuge. Restoring a prairie is slow, patient work. Crews collect native seed by hand, from big bluestem and Indian grass to coneflower, bergamot, and blazing star. They cut back invading buckthorn, and most importantly, they bring back fire. Carefully managed burns clear the old growth, return nutrients to the soil, and give deep-rooted native plants the edge they evolved to hold. Year by year, the grassland thickens and the pollinators return. What looks like untouched wild land is in truth a landscape being gently, deliberately healed. Between the lakes lie the marshes, and the marshes may be the busiest places of all. Reeds and cattails rise from black water while red-winged blackbirds trill from the tops of the stalks. Herons stalk the shallows on careful legs. Turtles bask on half-sunken logs, and unseen beneath the surface, a whole hidden world carries on. Wetlands like these do quiet, essential work, filtering water, soaking up floods, and sheltering more living things per acre than almost any landscape around them. On our second morning, we came back to the very same wild string of lakes, but through a different door. The first day we had entered from Bloomington, among the oaks and prairie of Hyland. Now we crossed to the western edge into Eden Prairie, where the reserve changes character. Here the trails run closer to the water, the woods grow thicker, and the lakes take on a wilder, marshier feel. It is the same connected wilderness, reached by a completely different way in. This western gateway opens onto the Anderson Lakes. There are 3 of them, connected shallow basins that straddle the boundary between Bloomington and Eden Prairie. They drain into 9 Mile Creek, part of a watershed that eventually reaches the Minnesota River. More marsh than open lake, ringed by cattail and willow, the Anderson Lakes are managed above all as a sanctuary for wildlife. In places, the narrow trail is the only sign that people are here at all. Water ties this whole landscape together. 9 Mile Creek winds down through Eden Prairie and Bloomington, linking marsh to lake to river in one continuous system. It is a reminder that no lake here truly stands alone. Rain that falls on a suburban street can travel through these wetlands, be cleaned and slowed by the reeds, and arrive downstream far gentler than it began. Watershed districts watch over that flow today, testing the water and working to keep this chain of lakes healthy. For animals, this connected refuge is a lifeline. Great blue herons and egrets fish the shallows. Painted turtles line the fallen logs. Deer move through the oak groves at dawn. Muskrats cut silver wakes across the marsh. And in spring and fall, migrating birds drop from the sky to rest and feed. In a metro area of more than 3 million people, an unbroken corridor of water and grass like this one is precious. A place where wild things can still find room to live. Stand back and the pattern comes clear. Hyland Lake, Bush Lake, and the Anderson Lakes are not separate ponds but beads on a single strand, linked by creeks, marshes, and shared groundwater across 2 suburbs. That is the quiet genius of this reserve. By protecting the whole chain rather than a single lake, it keeps the water moving and the wildlife connected. 2 gateways, many lakes, one living system that simply refused to be paved over. None of this happens by accident. Every open view, every restored prairie and clean stretch of water is the result of decades of decisions. To buy the land, to bring back fire, to pull the invasive brush, and to test the water year after year. Park crews, watershed districts, and countless volunteers keep this place wild on purpose. What began as an effort to simply hold back the city has grown into something greater, a long, patient act of bringing a whole landscape back to life. Two mornings, 2 gateways, one wild string of lakes hidden in the middle of a modern city. We walked in from Bloomington among the oaks, and again from Eden Prairie beside the marshes, and found the same simple gift both times. Space to breathe, water to watch, and the deep quiet of a landscape far older than any of the roads around it. If places like this move you the way they move us, come explore the rest of the world along with us.